She is nothing. She is no one. Hold her down. You are no longer my daughter. I, Alpha of Thornwood, cast you out. The crack of the whip echoed through the square. She had endured 19 years of their cruelty. But this time, they meant to break her completely. What none of them expected, what she herself could never have imagined, was that the Alpha of Iron Peak, the most feared wolf in the Northern Territories, would step out of the shadows and speak 4 words that changed everything. This one is mine. The whip found her back before the sun had even risen. Saren bit through the inside of her cheek, swallowing the scream that clawed at her throat. She would not give them the satisfaction, not today, not ever. 12 lashes for incompetence, the enforcer announced, his voice carrying across the packed square where a handful of early risers had gathered to watch. The Alpha's orders. Saren's fingers curled into the wooden posts they had bound her to, splinters biting into her palms. Her thin tunic offered no protection. It never did. She had learned years ago to wear loose clothing, fabrics that would not stick to wounds as they healed. The second lash split the air. She counted the heartbeats between strikes. 1, 2, 3. The enforcer liked to make her wait, liked to let the anticipation build until her muscles screamed from tensing. Pathetic creature, someone muttered from the watching crowd, cannot even take a beating with dignity. Saren recognized the voice. Mira, one of the kitchen workers who had once been kind to her, before the others made it clear that kindness toward the Alpha's disgraced daughter came with consequences. The third lash landed across the still raw wounds from last week's punishment. This time, a sound escaped her. Not a scream. Something smaller. A gasp that she immediately hated herself for. What was her crime this time? A younger voice, curious rather than cruel, dropped a tray during the council breakfast, spilled wine on Elder Varric's robes. 12 lashes for spilled wine? She's lucky it wasn't 20. You know what she is. What she is. Saren had heard variations of that phrase her entire life. The cursed daughter. The hollow wolf. The stain on the Vale bloodline that no amount of punishment seemed to wash clean. By the 8th lash, her vision had begun to blur at the edges. By the 10th, she could feel the warm trickle of blood running down her spine, pooling at the waistband of her trousers. By the 12th, when the enforcer finally untied her wrists and let her crumple to the ground, she could barely remember her own name. But she did not cry. She had not cried since she was 7 years old, when she learned that tears were just another weapon others could use against her. Get up. A boot nudged her ribs, not hard enough to crack bone, but hard enough to send fire through her already screaming nerve endings. You have duties. The delegation from Iron Peak arrives at midday, and the Great Hall needs to be spotless. Saren pushed herself to her hands and knees. The world tilted dangerously, but she forced it to steady through sheer will. Did you hear me, Hollow? I heard you. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. A small victory. The Great Hall. Midday. She rose on legs that trembled but held, refusing to look at the faces watching her. She knew what she would see there. Disgust, satisfaction, the particular gleam that came from watching someone lower than yourself suffer. The walk back to the servants' quarters took twice as long as usual. Every step pulled at the wounds on her back, sending fresh waves of agony through her body. But Saren had learned to compartmentalize pain, to tuck it away in a corner of her mind where it could not touch her. She had learned many things in 19 years of being Thornwood's favorite target. In the small washroom reserved for the lowest-ranking pack members, she peeled off her ruined tunic and twisted to examine her back in the cracked mirror. The reflection that stared back at her was familiar. Sharp cheekbones made sharper by meals that never quite filled her stomach, dark hair that fell past her shoulders in tangled waves, and eyes the color of moonlit silver. Pale, luminous, unsettling in their intensity. Her mother's eyes, they said. Unnatural eyes. Eyes that marked her as something other, something wrong. Saren cleaned her wounds with methodical efficiency, hissing through her teeth as the cloth dragged across torn flesh. The scars beneath the fresh cuts told a story she tried not to read. Years of punishments for crimes both real and invented. Years of being the vessel into which an entire pack poured its contempt. Midday, she reminded herself, the Iron Peak delegation. She had heard stories about the Mountain Pack and their alpha. Cale Ashford, they called him, the Frost King, the wolf who walks alone. He had taken leadership of Iron Peak at 23 after challenging his own father. A fight that lasted less than 3 minutes and ended with the old alpha's throat in his son's jaws. That was 8 years ago. In the time since, Iron Peak had become the most powerful pack in the Northern Territories. And today, he was coming here. Saren pulled on a fresh tunic, wincing as the fabric settled against her wounds, and braided her hair away from her face with practiced fingers. She had no idea why the thought of the Frost King's arrival made something flutter in her chest. She had no idea that by sunset, her entire world would shatter. The great hall gleamed by the time Saren finished scrubbing the last of the stone floors. Her back screamed with every movement, but she had learned to work through pain the way others learn to breathe, automatically, without conscious thought. The windows sparkled, the long tables shone with fresh oil, and the ceremonial banners of thornwood hung proud along the walls, a gray wolf against a field of thorned roses. Saren had always hated those banners. Still here, little hollow? The voice slithered across the empty hall like poison. I would have thought you'd be hiding after this morning's entertainment. Saren straightened slowly, keeping her expression neutral as Isolda Thorn descended the stairs from the upper gallery. The daughter of Thornwood's wealthiest merchant family moved with the liquid grace of someone who had never known a moment of uncertainty in her life. Golden hair cascading over shoulders draped in silk. Amber eyes bright with the particular cruelty of the privileged. The hall needed cleaning, Saren replied. I cleaned it. How dutiful. Isolda stopped a few feet away, close enough for Saren to smell her perfume. Jasmine and something sweeter beneath. It's almost sad, really. All these years of trying to prove yourself, and you're still nothing more than a rag they use to wipe up messes. Saren said nothing. Engaging with Isolda was like feeding a fire. It only made the flames grow higher. Nothing to say? Isolda tilted her head, a smile playing at her lips. Not even going to ask about Corin? The name hit Saren like a physical blow. She did not let it show. What about him? The words came out flat, disinterested, even as her stomach dropped. Oh, you haven't heard? Isolda's smile widened, showing teeth. He's been spending quite a lot of time with me lately, walking in the gardens, taking meals together. Last night we watched the moon rise from the eastern ridge. Saren's hands curled into fists at her sides, hidden in the folds of her worn skirt. Corin, the beta's son. The boy who had found her crying behind the stables when she was 8 years old and sat beside her without saying a word. The young man who had slipped her bread when her rations were cut. Who had met her eyes across crowded rooms when everyone else looked through her like she was glass. Be patient, he had whispered to her 3 months ago, his hand warm on her cheek. When I take my father's position, things will change. I'll make sure you're protected. I'll make sure no one ever hurts you again. She had believed him. Gods help her. She had believed every word. He's being polite, Saren said, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her. Your families have business together. Isolda laughed, a crystalline sound that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. Is that what you tell yourself? That he's just being polite when he brings me wildflowers? When he whispers that my wolf is the most beautiful he's ever seen? Saren felt the words like individual knife wounds. He pities you, Hollow. That's all it ever was. A strong wolf like Corin would never actually choose someone like you. Isolda leaned closer, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Someone broke in. Someone whose own wolf is so disgusted by her that it refuses to wake up. The silence that followed was suffocating. Saren wanted to scream, wanted to grab Isolda by her perfect golden hair and slam her head into the freshly polished table, wanted to unleash 19 years of swallowed rage in a single, devastating moment. Instead, she said, "Excuse me, I have other duties." She walked past Isolda without waiting for a response, her spine straight despite the agony radiating from her wounds, her chin lifted even as her heart crumbled to ash in her chest. The memories came unbidden as she moved through the castle's back corridors. Corin at 12, teaching her to hold a knife properly when the training master refused to include her in lessons. Corin at 15, standing between her and a group of pack youth who had cornered her near the river, his wolf rising in his eyes as he snarled them into retreat. Corin at 18, his forehead pressed to hers in the darkness of the supply cellar, making promises that tasted like hope. "You're special, Saren. Different from the others. One day, everyone will see what I see." Crumbs, she realized now. He had been feeding her crumbs while Isolda feasted at the table. And still, some pathetic part of her wanted to believe it wasn't true. A door ahead opened, and Corin himself stepped into the corridor. He froze when he saw her. Saren froze too. For a long moment they simply stared at each other. His dark hair was damp from washing, his strong jaw shadowed with the beginnings of a beard. He was beautiful, she thought distantly. He had always been beautiful. "Saren." His voice was soft, careful. "I heard about this morning. Are you—" "Don't." The word came out sharper than she intended. Something flickered across his face. Guilt, maybe? Or just discomfort. "I wanted to—" "The Iron Peak delegation arrives soon. You should prepare." She stepped around him, close enough to feel his warmth, close enough to smell the cedar soap he always used. "I have duties." His hand caught her elbow, gently, so gently it made her want to weep. "Saren, please. We need to talk. There are things I need to explain. Tonight." She pulled free, still not looking at him. "After the welcome feast. Meet me at the old mill." She walked away before he could respond. And she did not see the way his expression twisted, relief and guilt, and something darker tangled together in his handsome features. She did not see Isolda watching from the shadows at the end of the corridor, a satisfied smile curving her perfect lips. The delegation from Iron Peak arrived with the precision of a military campaign. Saren watched from the kitchen doorway as the riders crested the eastern hill. 20 wolves in human form, mounted on horses bred for mountain terrain, their dark leathers and gray cloaks marking them as clearly as any banner. And at their head, riding a stallion black as midnight, was him. Cale Ashford. Even from this distance, Saren understood why they called him the Frost King. He sat his horse with the stillness of carved ice, his presence radiating an authority that made Alpha Brennan, her father, the word still bitter on her tongue, look diminished by comparison. "Don't stare, Hollow." A cook shoved past her with a tray of bread. "He'd sooner gut you than look at you." Saren stepped back into the kitchen's shadows, but her eyes remained fixed on the approaching delegation. The Iron Peak Alpha was tall, she realized, as he dismounted in the courtyard below. Broad-shouldered beneath his traveling cloak, with dark hair that fell to his collar and a face that seemed designed to intimidate. Sharp angles, a strong jaw, and eyes that even from here appeared to absorb light rather than reflect it. He moved like a predator. Every step measured, every gesture controlled. When Alpha Brennan approached to greet him, the difference between the two men was almost laughable. Brennan with his nervous energy and too wide smile, Cale with his absolute stillness and expression of winter stone. "Saren?" The head cook's voice cracked like a whip. "Stop gawking and start serving. The welcome wine needs to go out. She grabbed the tray of goblets, steadying them against her hip, and slipped through the servants' entrance into the great hall. The space that had been empty an hour ago now buzzed with activity. Thornwood's council members had assembled in their finest clothes, their mates and children arranged in careful hierarchies designed to impress. The Iron Peak wolves stood in a loose formation near the hearth, their relaxed postures somehow more threatening than aggression would have been. Saren moved through the crowd with practiced invisibility, offering wine, collecting empty cups, keeping her head down and her movements efficient. She had learned long ago that the best way to survive these gatherings was to be furniture, present but unnoticed, useful but forgettable. She was refilling a council member's goblet when she felt it. A weight on her skin, a prickle at the back of her neck. The unmistakable sensation of being watched. Saren glanced up, scanning the room with the peripheral awareness that years of vigilance had honed, and met eyes the color of a winter storm. Cale Ashford was looking directly at her, not through her, the way everyone else did. Not past her, as if she were simply part of the scenery. At her, with an intensity that made the air leave her lungs in a rush. For one endless moment the great hall disappeared, the noise faded, the crowds blurred. There was only those eyes, ancient and knowing, pinning her in place like a butterfly beneath glass. She saw his nostrils flare slightly, as if catching a scent that surprised him. His head tilted, the barest fraction, and something flickered across his stern features. Recognition, perhaps. Or curiosity. He sees me, she thought, and the realization was terrifying. Then someone jostled her elbow, breaking the spell. Wine sloshed over the rim of the goblet she held, splashing crimson across her hand. "Watch it, Hollow." The council member whose cup she had been filling glared at her with undisguised contempt. "Clumsy creature, get out of my sight." Saren mumbled an apology, her heart hammering against her ribs, and retreated toward the servants' corridor. She did not look back. If she had, she would have seen Cale Ashford still watching her, his slate-colored eyes following her every step until she vanished through the doorway. She would have seen him turn to the wolf at his right, his beta, a scarred man named Corin, and murmur, "The girl with the silver eyes. Find out everything about her." But Saren saw none of this. She only felt the ghost of that gaze burning between her shoulder blades, a phantom heat that lingered long after she had fled into the safety of the kitchen's chaos. The old mill stood at the edge of Thornwood's territory, where the forest thickened and the moonlight barely penetrated the canopy. Saren arrived first, as she always did. She sat on the crumbling stone wall that had once channeled water to the wheel, her back aching despite the salve she had stolen from the healer's stores. The night air carried the scent of pine and distant rain, and somewhere in the darkness, an owl called to its mate. She heard Corin before she saw him, the familiar rhythm of his footsteps, the slight catch in his breath as he pushed through the overgrown brambles. "You came." He emerged from the shadows, his handsome face painted silver by the thin moonlight filtering through the trees. "I wasn't sure you would." "I said I would." Corin moved closer, stopping just out of arm's reach. The distance felt intentional, and Saren's pulse quickened at the realization. "About Isolda," he began. "You don't owe me explanations." The words tasted like ash. "We're not... You never promised me anything official." "Saren." He closed the gap between them, his hands finding her shoulders with a gentleness that made her eyes burn. "Look at me, please." She lifted her gaze to his. "Isolda means nothing," Corin said, his voice low and fervent. "She's a political convenience. My father's idea, not mine. He thinks an alliance with the Thorn family will strengthen his position on the council." "And what do you think?" "I think..." He paused, his thumbs tracing circles on her shoulders. "I think the Ember Moon ceremony is in 3 weeks." Saren's heart stuttered. The Ember Moon. the ancient ritual where wolves declared their chosen mates before the entire pack. It was sacred, binding, and absolutely irreversible once the words were spoken beneath the blood-red moon. Corin, I'm going to claim you. His forehead pressed against hers, his breath warm on her lips. In front of everyone, my father, Isolda. Your father. Let them all watch. Let them all see that I choose you. The hope that erupted in Saren's chest was almost painful. But my wolf, she whispered. I can't shift. The pack will never accept. They'll have no choice. His hands moved to cup her face, tilting it upward. Once I speak the words, you'll be under my protection. No more beatings. No more punishments. No more hiding who you are. Tears she had forbidden herself to shed for 12 years threatened to spill. Why? The question came out broken. Why would you risk everything for me? Corin smiled, that beautiful, devastating smile that had anchored her through years of darkness. Because you're the only real thing in this entire pack, he said. Because when I look at you, I see someone who should have broken 1,000 times but didn't. Because He swallowed hard. Because I love you, Saren. I always have. When he kissed her, Saren let herself believe. She let herself imagine a future where she woke without fear, where her back bore no fresh wounds, where she belonged to someone who saw her as more than a vessel for the pack's contempt. She let herself hope. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the mill, hidden among the ancient trees, amber eyes watched the scene unfold, and a cruel smile curved in the shadows. The days following Corin's promise should have been the happiest of Saren's life. Instead, they became a different kind of torture. Isolda's campaign shifted from subtle cruelty to calculated destruction. Every task Saren completed was mysteriously undone. Freshly washed linens appeared stained with mud. Polished silver vanished and reappeared in her quarters, prompting accusations of theft. Meals she prepared were pronounced inedible, the ingredients supposedly spoiled despite her careful selection. The punishments accumulated like storm clouds. 5 lashes for the ruined linens, 3 for the missing silver. Public humiliation in the dining hall when the alpha spat out his breakfast and demanded to know which incompetent fool had prepared it. Curious, Isolda remarked one afternoon, cornering Saren in the laundry rooms. How everything you touch seems to turn to disaster lately. One might almost think the gods themselves are trying to tell you something. Saren kept her eyes on the sheets she was folding. One might almost think someone is helping the gods along. Careful, Hollow. Isolda's voice dropped to something dangerous. Accusations without proof are punishable offenses, and you're already running out of back to scar. That night, Saren found a note slipped beneath her door. He's mine. He's always been mine. And after the Ember Moon, everyone will know it. The handwriting was elegant, feminine, unmistakable. Saren crumpled the paper in her fist, but the words had already carved themselves into her mind. She tried to find Corin, to tell him what was happening, but he had become strangely scarce. Council meetings, his father claimed. Delegation duties with the Iron Peak visitors, who had extended their stay for reasons no one seemed willing to explain. When she did catch glimpses of him, Isolda was always nearby, her hand on his arm, her laughter ringing through the halls, her golden head tilted toward his in intimate conversation. Political convenience, Saren reminded herself. He said, she means nothing. But the doubt had taken root, and it grew a little larger with each passing day. On the 5th night, she witnessed something that made her blood turn to ice. She had been delivering fresh candles to the council chamber when she heard voices from within. Low, urgent, clearly not meant to be overheard. The Iron Peak Alpha is asking questions. Beta Crane's distinctive baritone. About the girl. What kind of questions? Her father's voice, sharp with irritation. Her lineage. Her mother. Why she cannot shift. A pause. He seems interested. Interested? Alpha Brennan laughed, but it was a hollow sound. In that worthless creature? Let him ask. There's nothing to find. With respect, Alpha, I'm not certain that's true. If he discovers, he won't. Her father's voice turned to steel. And if he does, we'll deal with it the same way we dealt with her mother. Now leave me. I need to think. Saren pressed herself against the wall, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain they would hear it. Her mother, her lineage. What had they done to her mother? She had been told her mother died in childbirth, that the strain of bringing a defective, wolfless pup into the world had been too much for her body to bear. But that conversation suggested something else entirely. Something far more sinister. Serene found herself drawn to the castle's northern terrace in the hours before dawn. It was the only place in Thornwood where she could breathe. A forgotten overlook where crumbling stone met open sky, where the weight of the pack's hatred felt lighter somehow. She went there to think, to remember who she was beneath the scars and the silence. She did not expect to find someone already there. Cale Ashford stood at the terrace's edge, his dark silhouette carved against the pre-dawn gray. He did not turn when she approached, though she knew, somehow, impossibly, that he had sensed her presence long before her footsteps reached his ears. You should not be here. His voice was deeper than she had imagined, roughened by something that sounded like disuse. A servant wandering the castle at this hour invites suspicion. Saren stopped several feet away, her pulse racing. I could say the same for visiting alphas. Something shifted in his posture. Not quite a laugh, but close. I do not sleep well in unfamiliar territory. He turned his head slightly, just enough that she could see the sharp line of his jaw. And you? What keeps you from your bed? Everything, she wanted to say. Fear. Hope. The promise of a man I'm terrified to trust and questions about a mother I never knew. Instead, she said, the same. Silence stretched between them, but it was not uncomfortable. It felt almost natural, like the quiet between two people who understood that words were not always necessary. You are the Alpha's daughter. It was not a question. In blood only. Blood is not nothing. His ash-colored eyes found hers, and she felt that same strange recognition from the Great Hall. Some wolves carry more in their veins than they know. Saren frowned. What do you mean? But Cale did not answer directly. Instead, he turned fully to face her, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. The wolves who call you hollow, he said slowly. Have they ever considered that some creatures simply wait for the right moment to emerge? My wolf never woke. I'm broken. Broken. He repeated the word as if tasting something bitter. I have watched many wolves in my years as Alpha. The ones who rise fastest are not always the strongest. They are simply the most desperate to prove themselves. The ones who endure, who survive when all logic says they should not, are different. They carry something that cannot be taught or trained. And what is that? Purpose. He studied her for a long moment. You have endured much, Saren Vale. More than most would survive. Have you never asked yourself why? The question burrowed into her chest and lodged there like a splinter. I should go, she heard herself say. The kitchens will need the beta's son. Kyle's voice stopped her mid-turn. Corin Crane, you trust him. It was not a question. He's going to claim me. The words came out defensive. At the Ember Moon. Cale said nothing. But his silence was heavy, weighted with something that felt dangerously like pity. He loves me, Saren added, hating how small her voice sounded. The Alpha of Iron Peak studied her for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost gentle, though the word felt wrong applied to a man like him. I have learned, in my years of leading wolves, that love is not measured by what people say in darkness. He stepped past her, close enough that she caught his scent, pine and wood smoke and something wild beneath. It is measured by what they do in the light, when everyone is watching. He disappeared into the castle before she could respond. Saren stood alone on the terrace, the first rays of dawn breaking over the mountains, his words echoing in her mind like a warning she was too afraid to heed. What they do in the light, when everyone is watching. The Ember Moon was 2 weeks away. She would learn the truth of Corin's love soon enough. The night of the Ember Moon arrived wrapped in crimson light. Saren had dressed carefully in the only decent garment she owned, a simple dress of deep blue that Corin had secretly gifted her months ago. She had braided her dark hair and pinned it with a wooden clasp carved in the shape of a crescent moon. Tonight, she told herself as she walked toward the gathering field. Tonight, everything changes. The entire pack had assembled beneath the blood-red moon. Torches blazed in iron stands, casting dancing shadows across the sacred circle where generations of wolves had claimed their mates. The air thrummed with anticipation, with the primal energy of a ritual older than memory. Saren found a place at the edge of the crowd, her heart hammering against her ribs. She searched for Corin among the assembled wolves but could not find him. "He'll be here," she assured herself. He promised. Alpha Brennan stepped into the sacred circle, his voice booming across the field. "Under the light of the Ember Moon, we gather to witness the bonds that will shape our pack's future. Let those who wish to claim step forward and speak." One by one, wolves entered the circle. Saren watched as couples formed, some expected, others surprising. Each declaration was met with howls of approval, with the ancient blessing that sealed 2 lives together. The crowd began to thin. Saren's palms grew slick with sweat. "Where is he?" And then she saw him. Corin emerged from the crowd, his dark hair gleaming in the torchlight, his jaw set with determination. Saren felt her breath catch, felt hope surge through her veins like wildfire. He walked toward the sacred circle. He did not look at her. "Corin Crane," Alpha Brennan announced. "Do you come to make a claim?" "I do." Saren stepped forward, her legs trembling, her heart so full it threatened to burst. This was it. This was the moment she had dreamed of for years, the moment when everything she had endured would finally mean something. "I claim Isolda Thorn as my chosen mate." The words did not register at first. Saren stood frozen, one foot still raised to step forward, her mind refusing to process what her ears had just heard. "Isolda." He said, "Isolda." The golden-haired woman glided into the circle, her smile radiant, her hand reaching for Corin's, as if this had always been the plan, as if Saren had never existed. "No." The word escaped before she could stop it. A broken whisper that somehow carried across the sudden silence. Corin's eyes finally found hers. There was no love there, no regret. Only the cold calculation of a man who had made his choice. She actually thought he would choose her. Someone in the crowd laughed. The Hollow believed she could be claimed. More laughter, spreading like poison. "Did you see her face? She really believed. Pathetic creature. Should have known her place." Saren's vision blurred. Her lungs refused to fill. She was drowning in open air, surrounded by the wolves who had tormented her entire life, watching the last fragment of her hope crumble to dust. "Enough." Alpha Brennan's voice silenced the crowd. He stepped toward her, and there was something in his eyes, something cold and final, that made her blood turn to ice. "Since you have chosen to make a spectacle of yourself, daughter, perhaps this is the appropriate time to address another matter." Saren tried to speak. No sound came out. "I have tolerated your existence in this pack for 19 years, her father continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the field. 19 years of shame, 19 years of watching the stain your mother left behind walk among decent wolves. Father, do not call me that. His hand struck her face with enough force to send her staggering. You are not my daughter. You never were. Saren tasted blood. Your mother was a traitor and a whore who spread her legs for a wolf from a rival pack. You are the product of that betrayal. A mongrel, a corruption, an abomination that should have been drowned at birth. The crowd had gone deathly silent. I, Brennan Vale, Alpha of Thornwood, hereby cast you out. His voice rang with ritual authority. You are no longer pack. You are no longer protected. You are nothing. He turned to the enforcers standing at the edge of the circle. 20 lashes. Let her blood seal the severance. Strong hands seized her arms. She was dragged to the whipping post at the center of the sacred circle. The same circle where moments ago she had expected to be claimed, to be loved, to finally belong. The first lash split her back open. Saren screamed. She had promised herself she would never scream. 19 years of silence, 19 years of swallowed pain, and she had broken in front of everyone. The second lash fell. The third. By the 10th, she had stopped screaming. By the 15th, she had stopped feeling. Her body hung limp against the post, held upright only by the ropes binding her wrists, her blood pooling black in the crimson moonlight. This is how I die, she thought distantly. Alone, broken, nothing. The 16th lash never came. Stop. The word was not loud. It did not need to be. It carried the weight of mountains, the cold of northern winds, the absolute authority of a wolf who had never been challenged and won. The enforcer's arm froze mid-swing. Serene, drifting somewhere between consciousness and oblivion, heard footsteps approaching. Slow, deliberate. Each one echoing through the silence like a death knell. Alpha Ashford. Her father's voice had lost its commanding edge. This is an internal pack matter. Thornwood's discipline is not Iron Peak's concern. You are correct. Kale's voice came from somewhere close, closer than she expected. Thornwood's discipline is not my concern. A pause that stretched like eternity. But she is. Saren forced her eyes open. Kale stood between her and the enforcer, his broad back blocking the torchlight. He had not drawn a weapon. He did not need to. His presence alone was enough to make the enforcer retreat 3 steps. I don't understand, Alpha Brennan said, and for the first time, Saren heard fear beneath his bluster. She's nothing. A cast-off. A hollow. She is none of those things. Kale turned, and his winter sky eyes swept across the assembled pack with barely concealed contempt. She is the daughter of Ilara Vance. The name rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. Saren's fading mind struggled to grasp the meaning, but she saw her father's face drain of color, saw the elders exchange looks of horror, saw Corin's carefully composed expression crack with something that looked like dawning terror. That's impossible, Brennan whispered. Ilara died. Ilara was murdered. Kale's voice could have frozen the summer sun. Murdered by this pack to hide the shame of an alpha who could not hold his mate's loyalty. Murdered because she carried a child that was not his. A child whose father was my uncle, Rendell Ashford of Iron Peak. The silence that followed was absolute. Saren felt the world tilt. Iron Peak. My father was from Iron Peak. She carries Ashford blood, Kale continued, turning to face Alpha Brennan directly. Which means every scar on her back, every lash she has endured, every humiliation you have heaped upon her is a blood debt owed to my pack. He let the words settle. Then he moved. His hands were gentle, impossibly gentle, as he cut the ropes binding her wrists. When she collapsed, he caught her, lifting her against his chest as if she weighed nothing. What are you doing? Brennan's voice had risen to something close to panic. You cannot simply take. I am not taking. Kyle looked down at Saren, and something in his gaze made her heart stutter despite the agony consuming her body. I am claiming. He turned to face the crowd, the sacred circle, the blood-red moon hanging overhead. Under the light of the Ember Moon, I, Cale Ashford, Alpha of Iron Peak, claim Saren Vale as my own. Her enemies are now my enemies. Her blood is now my blood. Her protection is now my sacred duty. The ritual words rang through the night, ancient and binding, witnessed by moon and pack and the ancestors watching from beyond. Any who challenge this claim, Cale added, his voice dropping to something deadly, may step forward now. No one moved. No one breathed. And then Cale spoke again, his words carrying across the field like a blade. This one is mine. Saren, cradled against the chest of a man she barely knew, looked up at his face, carved from stone, terrible in its beauty, and saw something she had never seen directed at her before: certainty. He had chosen her, not out of pity, not out of convenience. He had claimed her before the entire pack, knowing what it would cost, knowing what it would mean. Hold on, he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. I have you now. Saren's eyes closed, and for the first time in 19 years, she let herself fall. Saren woke to the scent of pine and mountain air. She lay in a bed softer than anything she had ever known, wrapped in furs that held the warmth of a fire she could hear crackling nearby. Her back ached, but distantly. A healer's touch had been there, drawing out the worst of the pain. The room around her was unlike anything in Thornwood. Stone walls carved directly into the mountain, windows that looked out onto snow-capped peaks and endless sky, tapestries depicting wolves running beneath silver moons. Everything here felt ancient and powerful, as if the mountain itself was watching over her. You've been unconscious for 2 days. She turned her head and found Cale seated in a chair beside the bed. He looked different in the morning light. Less the terrifying Alpha, more the man beneath. There were shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. Where am I? Iron Peak, my personal quarters. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. The healer says you'll recover fully. She was surprised at how quickly your wounds are closing, said she's never seen anything quite like it. The scars will remain, but the damage was not permanent. Saren pushed herself upright, wincing at the pull of healing skin. Why did you do it? I told you. You carry Ashford blood. That's not why. She held his gaze, searching for the truth beneath his carefully composed expression. You could have demanded reparations. You could have used my existence as leverage against Thornwood. You didn't have to claim me. Cale was silent for a long moment. No, he finally admitted. I did not have to. Then why? He rose from the chair and moved to the window, his back to her. Beyond the glass, snow-capped peaks stretched toward a sky so blue it hurt to look at. I have watched you for weeks, he said quietly. I watched you endure humiliation without breaking. I watched you serve the wolves who tormented you with dignity they did not deserve. I watched you hope for a future with a man who was never worthy of you. He turned, and his eyes found hers. And I watched you stand alone in that circle, bleeding and broken, and still refuse to beg. Saren felt something warm bloom in her chest. You asked me once what keeps me from sleep, Cale continued. The answer is simple. I have led my pack for 8 years. I have made every decision alone. I have trusted no one completely. A pause. Until I saw you on that terrace, speaking truth to a stranger as if the consequences did not matter. Until I realized that the wolf I had been waiting for was never going to come from political alliances or strategic matings. He crossed back to the bed and knelt beside it, bringing his face level with hers. I claimed you because I wanted to, he said simply, because something in my soul recognized something in yours. Because when I saw you bleeding in that circle, My wolf nearly tore through my skin to reach you. Saren's breath caught. You do not have to accept this, Kale added, his voice gentling. The claim protects you regardless. You can live here in safety, build a life of your own, never owe me anything. I will not force what cannot be given freely. She stared at him, this man who had appeared from the shadows and remade her entire world in a single night. And if I want to accept it? Something flickered in his gaze. Hope, carefully contained. Then we take it slowly, he said. We learn each other. We build something real. Saren reached out and touched his face. The sharp angle of his cheekbone, the roughness of stubble along his jaw. He closed his eyes at the contact, a shudder running through him that spoke of years of his own loneliness. Slowly, she agreed. But when he leaned forward and pressed his forehead to hers, the word felt like a beginning rather than a boundary. 3 weeks into her new life at Iron Peak, Saren received an unexpected visitor. She was walking through the castle gardens, still marveling at the freedom to simply exist without fear, when she saw him standing at the entrance gate. Corin. He looked diminished somehow. The golden confidence that had once drawn her like a moth to flame seemed tarnished, his handsome face hollow with something that might have been guilt or might have been wounded pride. Saren. He stepped forward, but stopped when 2 Iron Peak guards materialized at her sides. I need to speak with you. Please. She should have refused. Should have turned away and let the guards escort him from the premises. Instead, she nodded. They walked to a stone bench overlooking the mountain valley, the guards maintaining a respectful distance. Corin sat beside her, leaving careful space between them. I made a mistake. His voice cracked on the word. The biggest mistake of my life. Saren said nothing. Isolda, my father, they convinced me that claiming you would destroy my standing in the pack. That you would drag me down. That our children would be. He stopped, swallowing hard. I was a coward. I know that now. You knew it then, Saren said quietly. You simply chose to be one anyway. He flinched as if she had struck him. I loved you. The words came out desperate, raw. I still love you. When I saw what they did to you, when I watched you bleeding in that circle, I wanted to stop it. I wanted to save you. But you didn't. No. His head dropped. I didn't. Saren looked at him, really looked, and felt something strange settle in her chest. Not anger, not even pain. Just a quiet, final clarity. I spent 10 years loving you, she said. 10 years believing that your crumbs were enough, that one day you would be brave enough to choose me in the light. I built my entire future on the foundation of your promises. She stood, looking down at the man who had once been the center of her world. But you were never going to choose me, Corin, not because of politics or your father or Isolda. Because choosing me would have required you to be something you're not. She paused. Someone who fights for what they want instead of taking the easy path. Saren, please, I forgive you. The words surprised her even as she spoke them. Not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to carry the weight of hating you. But we are finished. We were finished the moment you spoke Isolda's name in that circle. She turned to walk away. He'll never love you. Corin's voice had turned bitter, desperate. The Frost King doesn't love anything. He claimed you for politics, for blood debt, for... He claimed me because he chose to. Saren looked back over her shoulder. That's the difference between you and him, Corin. He didn't need a reason. He simply decided I was worth the risk. She walked away without looking back. That night, Saren went to Kale's chambers. She did not knock. She simply pushed open the door and found him standing before the fire, shirtless, his muscled back painted gold by the flames. Scars crisscrossed his skin, old wounds from battles she did not know, from a life she had yet to learn. He turned at her entrance, surprise flickering across his features before settling into something more guarded. Saren, is everything? She crossed the room in 3 strides, grabbed his face in both hands, and kissed him. For one heartbeat, he was still. Then his arms wrapped around her, crushing her against his chest, and he kissed her back with a ferocity that stole the breath from her lungs. This was not gentle. This was not slow. This was years of loneliness colliding, 2 broken souls recognizing in each other something they had never found anywhere else. His hands tangled in her hair, her fingers traced the scars on his shoulders, each one a story she wanted to know. When they finally broke apart, both gasping for air, his forehead dropped to hers. Saren, I'm done being patient. Her voice came out rough, hungry. I'm done being careful. I spent my entire life waiting for permission to exist, to hope, to want. I'm finished waiting. His eyes searched hers, and she could see the war happening behind them. Desire battling with honor, need fighting against the promise he had made to let her choose. Are you certain? The question came out strained, as if it cost him everything to ask. Because if we continue, I don't know if I'll be able to stop. My wolf. He's been fighting me since the moment I saw you. If you give me this, I won't be able to let you go. Kale. She spoke his name like a vow, like a prayer, like the first word of a new language she was just learning to speak. I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Something broke open in his expression, the careful control he maintained like armor finally cracking to reveal the man beneath. A man who had been just as lonely, just as starved for connection, just as desperate to find someone who saw him clearly. Then I'm done waiting too, he growled. When he lifted her, when he carried her to his bed, when his body covered hers like a shield against everything that had ever hurt her, Saren felt something shift inside her chest. Not just desire, though there was plenty of that. Something deeper, something awakening. Saren woke at midnight with fire in her veins. She gasped, jackknifing upright in Kyle's bed, her skin burning, her bones aching, her entire body vibrating with something she had never felt before. Saren? Kale was awake instantly, his hand on her back. What's wrong? I can't. The words dissolved into a moan of pain as something inside her expanded, pressed against her skin, demanded release. Kale's eyes widened. Your wolf, he breathed. She's waking. Saren screamed. The transformation was not gentle. It was violent, primal. 19 years of dormancy erupting in a single devastating moment. She felt her bones reshape, her muscles tear and reform, her skin split and bloom into fur. And through it all, she felt Kale's hands on her, steady, grounding, refusing to let her drown in the agony of becoming. When it finally ended, Saren stood on 4 legs in the middle of the chamber, panting, trembling, more alive than she had ever been. She looked down at herself and felt her breath catch. Her fur was not the common gray of Thornwood wolves or the dark brown of Iron Peak. It was silver, pure, luminous silver that seemed to glow with its own inner light. And when she caught her reflection in the window glass, her eyes blazed not gold or amber, but the pale, piercing blue of winter stars. Impossible. Kyle's voice was barely a whisper. He had shifted too, his massive black wolf circling her with something like reverence in his gaze. The silver line. It was supposed to be extinct. Saren did not understand the words, but she understood the way his wolf lowered his head to hers, the way his presence wrapped around her like a promise. Mate. Something whispered in her mind. Ours. She shifted back without thinking, the transformation fluid and natural, as if she had done it 1,000 times. Kale shifted with her, catching her in his arms as her human legs gave way. What am I? She asked, her voice shaking. You are the last daughter of the silver bloodline. Kale's voice was thick with emotion. The wolves who once ruled all the packs, before the wars, before the divisions. They were said to be touched by the moon herself, destined to unite what was broken, to heal what was wounded. He cupped her face in his hands, his eyes burning with something that made her soul ache. You are not hollow, Saren. You never were. Your wolf was simply waiting. Waiting for what? His thumb traced her cheekbone, wiping away tears she had not realized she was shedding. For a bond strong enough to wake her. For someone who saw you clearly enough to call her forth. A ghost of a smile crossed his features. For me, I think? Saren felt more tears slide down her cheeks, the first tears she had shed in 12 years, the first tears that were not born of pain, but of joy. I love you. The words came out broken, raw, absolutely true. I think I've loved you since that night on the terrace, when you saw me instead of through me. Kyle pressed his forehead to hers. I have loved you longer, he murmured. Since the first moment I watched you rise from the training ground dirt, bloody and beaten and absolutely refusing to stay down. Since the first time I saw the fire in your silver eyes that everyone else was too blind to notice. He kissed her then, soft, reverent, a seal on everything they had survived to find each other. The declaration ceremony took place beneath the full moon, 1 month later. Every alpha in the Northern Territories had been summoned to witness. They gathered in Iron Peak's Great Hall, a vast cavern of stone and firelight carved into the heart of the mountain, to see what many had dismissed as impossible. Saren stood beside Kale, dressed in silver and black, her dark hair unbound and flowing past her shoulders. The scars on her back were hidden beneath fine fabric, but she no longer felt shame about them. They were proof of what she had survived, proof that she was unbreakable. Let it be known, Kale's voice rang through the hall, that Saren Ashford, born Saren Vale, carries the blood of the silver line. She is my mate, my equal, and the future mother of my heirs. The crowd stirred with whispers, with shock, with the dawning realization that everything they thought they knew had been wrong. Let it also be known, Kale continued, his eyes finding the delegation from Thornwood, Alpha Brennan, pale and diminished, Corin, hollow-eyed beside a bitter Isolda, that any who question her place at my side are welcome to challenge me directly. No one stepped forward. No one dared. Saren looked out at the assembled wolves, the powerful, the proud, the ones who had mocked her, beaten her, cast her out as worthless, and felt something settle in her chest. Not vengeance, not triumph. Peace. She had spent 19 years believing she was broken, believing she was nothing, believing that love and belonging were for other people, better people, people whose wolves answered when called. She had been wrong. The moon had simply been waiting for the right moment to show her who she really was. Kale's hand found hers, warm and steady. How do you feel? He murmured, low enough that only she could hear. Saren looked up at him, her mate, her alpha, the man who had seen her when no one else would, and smiled. Whole, she said. For the first time in my life, I feel whole. Above them, through the great hall's open roof, the full moon blazed silver against the endless dark. And somewhere deep inside Saren's chest, her wolf lifted her head and howled.